Welcome to the CSBP Fertilisers Grow Better podcast, sharing knowledge with growers on leading crop nutrition, sustainable agriculture and other issues impacting the agricultural industry.
G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of the CSBP Grow Better podcast. My name's Grey Johnston and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Peter Bird, Senior Regional Manager West from the GRDC. G'day Peter.
G'day Grey, pleased to be here.
Very kind of you to make the time to join us today, and I guess a very busy time of the year at GRDC, and we've heard a lot about all different things, grains research recently, and keen to touch on those themes in our show today. But maybe first we'll kick off, just get you to introduce yourself to the listeners of the Grow Better podcast. Tell us about yourself and your role and how you ended up there.
Yeah, thanks Grey. So I've been in the industry for over 20 years now, generally in the agronomy type space in various roles across southern Australia. So that's kind of my background, working with growers fairly closely on how to grow more grain and how to solve problems on farm, that decision making on farm in various ways, driven across too many paddocks that I'd like to remember, Grey. But really pleased to be at GRDC. This opportunity came along and the purpose of GRDC really clicks to me in that, you know, I've always enjoyed research and I spent a bit of time looking after some small plot trials, but very clearly our customer is growers and working unashamedly for the benefit of growers. So, that really clicks with me.
So most of our audience, I think, are probably familiar with the RDC concept and how it works. But I mean, for those who aren't, can you give us a bit of a refresher on that purpose that you talked about?
Yeah, so there's 15 RDCs, Research and Development Corporations in Australia, one for each of the main commodities. For example, MLA for livestock is fairly familiar, AWI for wool. There's different ones for fisheries and horticulture and wine. But the GRDC model, we collect 0.99% of farm gate value as a levy. All grain growers in Australia pay that on 25 different grain crops, and the federal government chips in 50 cents on the dollar. That ends up to, somewhere up to and over $180, $200 million a year that we actually invest in research and development and extension for the benefit of grain growers.
And so I guess as the manager of GRDC in WA, in the Western Growing Region, you're responsible for allocating that funding. Is that how it works? We
definitely run a national model. So we look at grain growers across all of Australia and what's best for them and where we can best invest that money. My responsibility is what we're doing in Western Australia or across Australia, hitting the mark for grain growers of Western Australia. And also, are we doing business in the way we want to do? Are we having the appropriate connections and relationships with other industry players, particularly in WA from my perspective?
Right now, I guess is a as I touched on before, it feels to me like it's a busy time of year for you and research community and grains in general, because we kind of finish harvest and harvest finishes late, and then everyone's about to start thinking about seeding, and sort of in between those things, it seems we cram in a whole bunch of different events. Has that been the experience for you?
Oh, absolutely, and this year's been really jammed in. We had growers jumping off their head at just finishing harvest in February and coming along to a GRDC update event. So I've never experienced that kind of time pressure before from the grower's perspective. We're pretty consistent in what we do. We have our main Perth research updates in February each year, and actually the industry kind of builds that into their calendar. So that's pretty consistent. And then our regional updates generally follow on after that. Although COVID, the last couple of years, we've done some different things due to COVID, but our calendar there is pretty consistent. But certainly is a busy time of year for us. Lots of events, GRDC and others at this time of year through February, March.
So we're catching you now at the tail end of those updates. I guess give us the overview. What have been the real big themes that you've seen come through those updates? And I guess that relates to the main areas of research that GRD is focused on at the moment.
Sustainability has kept coming through more and more strongly over the years. We introduced 2 years ago a topic on sustainability, and it's been pretty consistently strong since then. This year in particular, supply chains and has come up a fair bit. And then focusing on to more agronomic things, Nitrogen management is always a strong theme for us. Soil management, and perhaps a bit more this year than previously, potassium as another nutritional type things. Add on to that the things around weed control and disease control, pests and that kind of thing. It's pretty consistent things from year to year, but a few quirks each year.
I mean, I don't know if we've got the opportunity to dig into some of those a little more, but I mean, I agree, and we talk about it quite a lot on the Grow Better podcast and at CSBP. We also ramping up our focus on sustainable agriculture. How does GRDC see itself playing in that sustainability, area of the market? And what are the kind of research priorities you have there, or what are growers asking you to research in that area?
I guess we want to give grain growers and industry some of the scientific research knowledge from which they can utilise to do what they need to do. We're building in measurements of greenhouse gas, for example, into a lot of our trials on the ground. Sustainability is in one way or another reaches through many of our investments, and it doesn't need to be a particular sustainability investment. Much of what we do leads to some of those outcomes.
And then you talked also about supply chains, and I was interested to hear at the recent Perth update about Grains Australia. Is that what it's called? And the new that feels like it's a new initiative for GRDC.
Yeah, it is. It really brings together a similar kind of body from each of the different grains. So really, that's all about efficiency, rather than having 6 different organisations for 6 different types of grain. It all brings it together into one body. It's really about efficiency.
So you mentioned soil management and nutrient management as well there, Peter. You've got a few investments and research in that area at the moment?
Yeah, the soil management has been some really big investments for us, particularly in WA over the years, partnership with DPIRT in particular, and delivering fantastic gains for grain growers. Some of these investments in terms of soil amelioration and soil re-engineering, the ability to change our soils so they can store more water, and then for the plants to be able to access more of that water. It's led to tremendous gains, like a tonne per hectare, a 50% yield increase, for example, not only this year, but across the foreseeable years in the future as well.
And are you seeing a lot of that research getting turned into action in the paddock?
Yeah, we are. Slowly, more and more hectares across WA are being ameliorated in one way or another, whether it's deep ripping or claying or liming has been around for a long time. I kind of put that into the same class as some of those other things in terms of getting our plants access to more water through the soil.
And so that's soil management and soil amelioration. And then I guess on nutrient management, and you talked particularly about nitrogen and potassium there. What have been the research priorities and research findings that we've been talking about recently from GRDC?
We've just initiated a fairly big national investment looking at nitrogen cycling in Australia, particularly looking at whereabouts is our nitrogen going. Is it leaching? Is it volatilising? We're still not really good enough in the way we manage our nitrogen, and it's become really important, more important than ever, with the increased price of nitrogen fertiliser and the greenhouse gas. Adding on to that, whereabouts does it go? The nitrogen banking concept seems to be a thing in the eastern states, but it's not in Western Australia. So hopefully this investment will try to answer that.
If we look at that investment a little more then, because I'm sure clearly at CSBP we love nitrogen and we talk about it a lot on this show, how does an investment like that work, and how long will it play out for, and who do you partner with to make it happen?
We try and partner with the best organisation in Australia to deliver that. So through feedback through growers or our researchers, we come up with these things. We develop these strategically, these things that we want to invest in, that we see there's opportunity. We generally go to open tender for those. Everybody who thinks they can do that work gets to apply for that. In this case, the University of Queensland is the lead organisation for that, but there's a node in Western Australia led by Louise Barton at UWA. Will
we get to see the outcomes in 1 year, 3 year, 5 years?
It'll take some time. So I can imagine it's a 4 or 5 year project. So, towards the end of that time frame, by the 3 or 4 year mark, we'll get a pretty good indication, and then by 4 or 5 years' time, hopefully we'll have some of those answers. So it's the research is a fairly long-term thing, as you probably realise, Grey. And when we invest initially, until we think growers might get a return, many years can go by.
And are there some things then in your other topics, I guess, in your experience at GRDC where you have seen or you feel proud about the investment that was made, and you really do see it translating into outcomes in the paddock now?
One of the big ones for Western Australia is the work we've put into canola disease management. Canola's become a huge crop, a big money earner for WA grain growers, and that's largely because of the advances that have been made in blackleg in particular, blackleg disease, management of that disease, both genetically and through other techniques. So that's fantastic to see, and a big win for growers.
You talked about potassium as well before, Peter, and I know CSBP and our field research team, which is celebrating its centenary this year, has been involved in recent years in a GRDC potassium trial, supporting some of the work from DPIRD. Have we learned anything there? Is there anything of interest of note?
I guess they've further refined and identified some critical values, but also the importance of nutrient interactions, Grey. The importance of having sufficient potassium, for our nitrogen uptake and the interactions there. That's come out. We know some of that, but it's also come out very strongly in what that investment has done.
As I mentioned before, I guess we have the opportunity now to catch you at the tail end of your big, I guess, roadshow series, if I can frame it like that. Have you been pleased with how that's gone and the attendance and the turnout?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, fantastic turnout in general, and we're really lucky to partner with GIWA, have an organisation like GIWA in Western Australia we can partner with, extremely professional and do a power of work for us to pull these things together. We, at GRDC, we invest $180, $200 million a year into research development and extension, and that's over 600 to 700 different investments, and they don't mean anything unless we get those answers to growers. Growers change something on their farm, practice change that'll lead to profitability. So this is one of our flagship investments in terms of trying to get that information to growers. So I've been really happy in general as important events for us, and they've run really well. Great.
And how do you think about, I guess, that balance between research, development, and extension? They're sort of different activities. How do you balance those in your role?
In the past, the perhaps old-fashioned way is you do your research and you come up with what you think the solution is, and then you start extending that information to growers. That's a bit old-fashioned. I think there's a better way where there's no real barriers between those different things. So growers at one end are actually quite involved in guiding the research. In that way, they can get some early indications of what's happening. So no real barriers in between. We see it as a bit of a continual process.
And what else is then on the priority for you at GRDC? Rest of the season, the next few seasons. What other things are you thinking about?
An important thing we're doing at the moment is developing our 5-year RD&E plan. The one we're in currently finishes on the 30th of June this year, and we're developing a new one to take us through the next 5 years. This is a statutory requirement signed off by the federal minister, but actually really guides our investment over the next 5 years. There's been many grower interviews and industry roundtables to try and guide that. The feedback there really has an impact on what we will invest in over the next 5 years.
And so do you do that at a WA level, or it's a national plan? How does that all work?
It's definitely national plan, national organisation, absolutely great. Looking at what things the plan that we're developing at the moment that will become live on the 1st of July this year. We'll look at ways we can try to get every paddock in Australia achieving its optimum yield. Another component of the plan is let's develop some things that'll push us beyond what we think is possible now. And third pillar around growing markets and capture value, that post-farm gate side, and sustainability piece where we'll have some investments that try and keep growers in the game in the long term.
In terms of your engagement with the local industry in WA, I guess one activity we've noticed recently is you've been increasing the size of your team, and in particular finding some of the best talent from CSBP Fertilisers. Luke Dawson, who's been on this show before in his capacity at CSBP, has recently joined you. Have you got buyer's remorse? Is there any chance we'll see him back at CSBP anytime soon?
We're not letting him go without a fight, Gray, and so far so good with Luke. Really pleased to. Thanks for training up Luke all those years. He's a wonderful resource for us. I think he's doing really well. So the team in WA, about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a push to regionalise in GRDC, and at that time we grew the regional offices. So Perth had a headcount of 13, I think. We've just recently increased that to 14. But got some really great people on board, including Luke. Wonderful to have Luke. He's going to add some value to us in terms of the way he deals with the industry and people, and his technical knowledge on the nutrition and fertiliser side as well. Wonderful opportunity for him to expand his knowledge a bit as well.
Good to hear that he's going well, and it was good to catch up with him at the recent research updates. Ag tech is, I guess, another theme, and I was really enjoyed the ag tech session that was held at the research updates. How does GRDC see itself playing in that kind of space? So
we see there's lots of opportunity there, Gray. It's one of the spaces where we see there's lots of value to be captured, but it's also a space where there's lots of startup and other companies, big and small, playing in that field as well. So it goes back to what we do in general. We generally, if we see there's a research question that needs to be answered, we'll kind of step in and do that to provide the answer to anyone in the industry. That's generally how we work. Identify bigger, broader questions that need some research to answer, and then feed that information to anybody in the industry who might be able to use it. And I assume that all our listeners out there know how to get in touch and feed those ideas through to GRDC. But just in case they don't, what other ways that you sort of collect those ideas? How does your funnel work? One way is a direct call to some GRDC staff or GRDC Western panel. That's pretty common. But we do run events around the state. We try to move them around as much as we can. One of the better ways is the National Grower Network. So we hold National Grower Network meetings around the state, different locations. And that's the perfect opportunity for growers and industry to feed their ideas for research or feedback in general in how GRDC operates. We're obliged to pick up those ideas that the collective people at those meetings put forward and respond in some way. Really nice, and I'm sure you'll be no doubt inundated with a barrage of research requests from the CSBP Grow Better podcast listeners after the show. Peter, I think that is it for us today on the Grow Better podcast. So can I just say again, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join us and give us insight into all things GRDC West. Thanks very much, Gray. Thank you, Peter, and thanks to you all out there in CSBP Grow Better podcast world. It's been our pleasure to work with the GRDC and support their research updates in recent months as part of our celebration of 100 years of trials and research. And of course, you'll keep hearing about the 100 years of trials and research on the Grow Better podcast this year. So if you do want to hear about that, keep listening. If you don't, sorry, you'll have to go and listen elsewhere, I suppose. But please, we do hope you keep tuning into the podcast. Also, follow us at CSBP Fertilisers on all your favourite social media platforms. But for now, I've been Grey Johnston. Thanks again, Peter Bird. See you later, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks for tuning into another episode of the CSBP Grow Better podcast. For more information about CSBP, please visit csbp-fertilisers.com.au or connect with us on social media at CSBP Fertilisers on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn.